So we have subjects all the way from no harm skipping these classes, all the way to subjects you cannot live without. Hey guys, in today's video we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and that is using the famous tier list to rank all our high school subjects based on real world usefulness. This way, hopefully you'll know which subjects you actually should be trying hard and studying for, and also which subjects you can probably just bludge and not worry too much about. So just a disclaimer before I start, my views are probably biased based on my STEM background, and my views may be quite narrow given I did not spend too much time on every single one of these particular subjects. But nevertheless, I will try to keep an open mind and focus on the general application and skills rather than the specific content. So starting off with, first of all, biology. Now, biology is one of those subjects that is quite popular, but not as popular as the other sciences such as physics and chemistry. I feel like biology is one of those subjects that is more focused on memorization rather than critical thinking and application of those skills, which I would say belongs more in chemistry and physics. And for that reason, because it's so focused on memorization of pure content, it's not actually very helpful, and unless you're going to like a health related degree, then in that case biology probably isn't a subject you need to worry too much about. So for that reason, I would probably put that in the don't study too much category. Now the next one is business studies, and this is a subject that is very similar to economics, but I feel like it's more of a less theoretical and mathematical based subject and more of a content and regulations and rules and more content heavy subject. So this is useful in its own right, but I feel like a lot of the stuff you learn in this subject is not applicable elsewhere, and the content is very surface level. So in that case, I will put that in the try not to fail category, as I feel like economics is probably a bit better than business studies and goes a lot more in depth with mostly the same kind of content. So the third subject on the list is chemistry, and this was one of the subjects I actually took in high school, but for year 11 and year 12, but I didn't really study too much for it at all. So even though I know all the content, I still don't think it's that useful, but it does teach you some skills to, it does teach you some application-based skills, such as like manipulating formulas, and it gives you that useful critical thinking knowledge by it. Not as much as some other subjects, but it definitely is not like completely useless. So even though like the content by itself, like memorizing the periodic table and things like knowing how many electrons there are in like an atom, or like knowing what is a precipitate, like those are more focused for like in the lab kind of work, and it's not really useful in the actual world environment unless you're like actually going to science. So that, because it's so niche, I don't think it's that helpful, and therefore I'm going to put it in the don't study too much for category. The next subject on the list is design and technology, and this one I actually feel is quite useful. I would have liked to take this subject as it would have given me a bit of an understanding of software development and also kind of an introduction into HTML and CSS and like designing for customers' user interface and user experience. So those, because that is something that's very important in like the business world, and if you're starting either a company or you're working for a large company, those are very important things to consider. So even though I didn't take that subject in my later years of high school, I think I would have probably liked to take it. So I'll probably put that in the useful category. So the next subject here on the list is drama, and for that, there's not much I can say about it except I don't feel like it's that helpful at all. It's not really going to be useful in getting you a job unless like you're going to acting, which you can do, but it is very, very hard to do so. It does teach you like a bit of things like portraying your emotions and I guess like how to express yourself and that kind of stuff, but it doesn't have any content, and I feel like it's more of a hobby than like a subject where you're actually like learning important things. So for that, I'll probably put that in the no harm skipping this class section. Unless like you're really, really passionate about it and you really enjoy it, then there's probably not much need for you to take it too seriously. The next one here is economics, and economics I actually think is a very important subject. It teaches you very logical problem solving and like how to apply common sense to real world scenarios. Like how does supply and demand change when, for example, something happens like coronavirus has impacted like supply and demand of masks, for example, and then you'll need to figure out like, okay, so what's going to happen to like world trade, what's going to happen to globalization. All these important things get impacted, And so there's like a lot of real world applications of economics, and also there's things that affect your own life as well. So what happens to, for example, if interest rates go up, what's going to happen to your mortgage repayments, what's going to happen to all your savings accounts, and what's going to happen to all your stock investments, stuff like that. So I think because it goes more in depth than business studies, I would put this in the useful category, just above business studies. So the next subject on the list is English. And English is a subject I think is just so important, because firstly, you need to know how to express yourself, either that be in writing, if to express your own ideas or your own opinions, or if you're like in a working environment and you have ideas that are in disagreement with other people, and like, why should people listen to your ideas? You need to be able to argue your points and convince other people to think that your opinions or your ideas are correct, which may or may not be the case, but to be able to express that, you definitely need a high level of English skill, and that is just important because you need to be able to communicate effectively. And that just happens in so many scenarios, either you're working with other people or in team environments, and it's just so important. So that is the first subject I'm actually going to put in the can't live without category. The next subject here is geography, and I think geography, well, like, you probably want to know the basics, like where certain countries are, how big is the United States, how big is Russia, where is the United Kingdom? Is it in Europe or is it in Asia? Like, besides that though, I don't think there's much you need to worry too much about geography. But this was a subject I did have to take until all the way up to year 10. So I had to read maps and all that stuff, and I don't think it was very helpful at all unless like I actually want to go in a specific field of that area. So for that, I'll probably put that in the no harm skipping this class. Although some people just really love memorizing countries, memorizing flags and all that stuff, but for me it's just, I don't see a use for it, and I'm going to put it in the no harm skipping class section. The next subject is history. So history in Australia at least is broken into multiple history subjects, so ancient history and modern history. Both of these subjects I would say is somewhat useful because it does teach you about the past, and like a lot of the past, from the past you can learn a lot of their mistakes and be able to not apply them in the present or in the future. So learning from the past is a good way to learn about like human culture and all that stuff, and like be able to understand people from their different perspectives. And it also is an important subject where it helps you to communicate clearly and communicate your ideas effectively as well, because there is a lot of essay writing involved. So I would probably put this in the try not to fail category because it's not as important in terms of useful skills such as like economics, but it is still holding some value when you're learning about it and also applying the skills you do learn. The next one here is languages. So for example, it can be all the way ranging from popular languages such as Chinese, French, all the way to very unknown languages or even dead languages like Greek or Latin. I feel like, so this would go on a spectrum. Some of the more common languages that you would probably want to speak with people, and like being bilingual is definitely an important thing and will help you a lot in the real world, especially in terms of communication. So I feel like languages is very useful. Unless like you're learning a language you already know anyways, then there's not much point to it if you're just brushing up on the grammar. Mostly it's the oral communication that is important. But I'm going to assume that it is a very important language and you will need to be communicating in it a lot. So I'll put that in the useful category. So the next subject here is maths, and maths is a subject that is very difficult, and it's a subject that is not for everyone. But there are a lot of applications in maths that you will need for the real world. For example, like even calculating how much you're going to spend on groceries, weekly budgeting or monthly budgeting, calculating taxes, mortgages, interest repayments, all that stuff is important. And a lot of industries and degrees, especially the STEM ones that have high paying jobs in the end, do require some basic level at least of mathematics. And for those reasons, I'd say mathematics is probably one of the subjects that is actually quite important, and the skills and information you will learn is very critical. Although some of it though, for example calculus and higher order like circle geometry, the more difficult and more niche kind of topics of mathematics is not as important. So for that I would say it's not as important as English, but most of the general content is still useful. So I'll put that in the useful subjects category. Now, the next one here is music. And for music, I would say it's probably a subject that is very comparable to drama. It does, like, I would say it's more of a hobby than a subject that you would want to learn. and the applications in the real world are not that useful besides like being able to help you, I would say, relax in some way. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the no harm skipping this class category. And that is probably coming from a bit of my bias because I was terrible at music all the way through primary school and high school. I did play an instrument, the clarinet, but besides that, I just had no talent for music at all, and it was a subject that I just did not enjoy or found useful. The next subject we have is physics, and this was a subject I took in high school all the way through to year 11 and year 12, and I think it's probably the most important science out there that you want to learn because it does teach you a lot about applied skills and thinking logically and reasoning through everything. So for that reason, I'd say because it's less content focused than chemistry, more application and less knowledge-based science subject. So in that case, I'm going to put it again in the useful category because it is actually, I'll probably put that in the try not to fail because it's not that much better than biology and chemistry. And in terms of the actual physics, like the rocket science stuff about stars, planets, that stuff isn't very helpful, but the more general down to earth content has a lot of applied things such as like magnetization is used in trains, in railroads, and things like light bulbs and electricity is very important. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the try not to fail category. The second last subject we have here is religion or studies of religion. This was a subject that we didn't take seriously in high school. The only usefulness I can think for it is, unless you're religious, it will give you some sense of what other people's values and beliefs are, which is very important. Besides that, the actual content though, I would say is not very helpful in your real life application, but it does help you understand people a bit better and like can be able to see things from their perspective. So I'm actually going to put religion in the no harm skipping class section. The last subject here is visual arts, and this was a subject I really liked back in primary school, but later on towards high school I kind of no longer had that passion for it. But I feel like the skills you learn from it are still very useful, especially like the most important one is probably like not being able to draw, but the creativity of like coming up with your ideas and like being able to put those in a format that can be represented. So I feel like visual arts is a subject that is somewhat underrated in terms of the actual skills, like being able to paint, being able to mold clay and that kind of stuff is not very helpful, but being able to express your ideas is something you definitely need in the real world. And for that reason, I'm actually going to keep it a bit higher than studies of religion and drama and music. Even though it is still a hobby subject, I'm going to put it in the don't study too much for category. So that is the final table of how I would rank each subject. If you have your own thoughts and opinions on these rankings, or if there's a subject you think I missed out and want to include, then do let me know down in the comments below and say what your favorite subject is. Again, this tier list ranking is just my opinion and definitely not something to be able to worry too much about, especially if you like one of the subjects I might have placed down in the bottom of the tier list. It was more of like a fun exercise considering you guys did just want to see more subject specific study content. So I wanted to do this before all that as a kind of a fun exercise. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to give it a big like down below and subscribe to this channel to not miss out on my future study content where I'll give specific studying strategies for each of these subjects that I described today, and a few other things such as college life and money making tips. As always, take care and I hope to see you guys in the next video.